There is nothing worse than untapped potentials. If you know that you're made for more, this is the place. I know that every successful person I've ever met has one thing in common. They do not let themselves fall victim to their circumstances. They figure out a way to rise above it. So join me on this journey where I help you to be better, do better, and have better in life and in business. If you're feeling stuck and you're needing some practical tools, some hope to get you to that better life, this is definitely a place for you. Hey, everyone. Welcome to the Unstuck Podcast. I am your host, Michelle Weemy, and today we get a chance to talk to Tasha Wilson. You guys are going to love her energy. I love the fact that I get a chance to spend another day with this beautiful woman. We've had a chance to talk a couple times outside of this episode, and you guys are going to love her as much as I do. So she is an incredible, accomplished speaker, author, Title IX case manager. She's a sexual assault survivor. She is really here to help empower people to move beyond or live beyond their trauma. And there's so much to you, Tasha, that you can bless our conversation with today that I can't wait to get started. So thanks for being on the show.
I'm so excited to connect with you again. And so thank you for the opportunity.
Yes. Okay. So why don't you do this justice, right? Because I just rattled off a bunch of cool things that you have the claim to, but why don't you tell us a little bit more of who you are and what lights you up? How do you love to serve people these days?
That is a wonderful question. I'm so glad you asked, because a lot of times, people see me for the things that you mentioned, but
Mhm.
like from day to day,
Yeah.
outside of that, Tasha is someone who just really finds purpose in impacting other people, making them feel good about
Yeah.
themselves. And that's through conversation, that's through a smile, acknowledging who they are, where they are in the moment, things like that. And so it's funny when I hear things about myself, about the stuff that I am accomplishing, in the world. But I think at the end of the day, the most important part of who I am is when those things are stripped away from me. And for me, it's always, how do I show up as my authentic self? How do I connect with people and make them feel? What does my character say about me? And so, the accolades and accomplishments are great, but it's kind of like, do I allow people into my personal space? Do I make them feel loved, seen, heard? That's my overarching goal from day to day.
Oh my gosh, I love it. You and I both are gifted with connectedness, right? Like that's why the two of us hit
Yeah,
it off so much. Like we feel like we've been friends for years because that is
absolutely.
who we are together. And so I love that about you. And you bring this energy and this beautiful spirit about you that makes me feel safe and warm and able to be myself around you. And not everybody has that. And so thank you for showing up in the world and using your gifts the way that you do. And I just have to I do want to ask though, like, tell us a little bit about your book. I want to know a little bit more about what you chose to put out into the world.
Yeah, so it's one of those things where I never thought that I would be an author. And so I'm kind of like still in awe that I'm now like an international best-selling one. Because, a part of my journey is very unique. When you see who I am today and in present day, it's almost like, how has someone who's able to light up a room or, make people feel safe and secure, was once someone who lacked confidence, low self-esteem, dealt with a lot of pain and trauma. And so what I did for me, writing was therapeutic. And so I realized that I had a voice by, placing my pen to paper. And I realized that if there are others who can connect with my story, or those who
Right.
can identify themselves within my story, why not share it with other people? And so a lot of my books are really about the pain that I've dealt with, the hurt, acknowledging that, but then working through that. And so, like, my first two books really display how I am in that moment working through the hurt while writing. And then my most recent two books, they talk about how I'm on the other side, where I'm now embracing the healing part of my journey, and how I am now, allowing that to be the limelight of who I am. And so, it's one of those moments where you capture not only the good side, but you also have to capture the low moments too. And so I
Yeah.
think with my books, I canvas that pretty well. And so people are able to see that balance to say, this life hasn't always been, glitter and sunshine, but I'm able to see how she's gradually blossomed into who she is now.
Yes. I love that. And that's what we also have in common. Instead of writing, I've been using my podcast as kind of that a way for me to process some of the things that I've gone through. And one of my most memorable episodes is my episode 100, where I talked about some of the things that I had been going through over the last several months that allowed me to process out loud, essentially. And when we show up in that vulnerable space, it can be really scary, can it?
Absolutely.
But that's probably one of the most impactful episodes that I've done, because I feel like there are other people who are going through it or have gone through it, and they need people like us that are brave enough, I guess, to step out into that vulnerability and to let other people know that they're not alone and that they're safe to feel the way that they're feeling, right? And that there is hope. There is hope at the other end of this season. And that's what I just love about you. So, would you be willing to share with us, Tasha, a little bit about those two first books and some of the things that you had to go through and work through, so that we can really understand kind of who you are? And what I love about this portion of the episode is really that vulnerability connection that you have with the audience, who are like, oh my gosh, me too, I've gone through that too, she understands me. So tell us a little bit about your journey that kind of led you to this place here.
Yeah, so I've always been someone who has been like very private,
Mhm.
very reserved, and I know it's like, well, how on earth
I
are
know.
you an author and speaker, right? And so um it's so funny because I even came off quite guarded, being young, growing up in a two-parent household, had an older brother, and all I knew is that life existed with them in it. I just kind of felt like in this bubble, if you will, like, okay, I couldn't see beyond that bubble. I couldn't see beyond the nucleus of who we were as a unit. And so, with my first two books, my dad had actually passed away when I was 16. And so something so detrimental also was something so just like revolutionary for
Right.
me. Like at 16, I didn't know how all of this would take a part of where I am now. And
Right.
so I'm in high school, I'm placed in a grief group, and they're expecting me to share with people I don't know how I'm feeling, how I'm processing the sudden death, and what I'm supposed to do with it. And so,
Right.
16, we all know is that awkward stage where you're still trying to figure out who you are, trying to
Right.
figure out what life is going to look like after high school, right? And so,
Yeah.
it was just so many questions coming at me at one time. I didn't know how to deal with it. And so I
Mhm.
shut down essentially.
Yeah.
And I remember the social worker saying to me in the grief group, if you don't feel comfortable, verbalizing how you're feeling, why don't you start writing them down? And
Yeah.
so that was the very beginning of how I was able to understand that vulnerability was a safe space for me. And so my first two books talk about how my life went from, me kind of going with life as usual, going with the flow and being content with that, and then having it disrupted. And
Yeah.
then it goes on to say how someone who was once so private is now put on display
Mhm.
because, coming from a household where, you know, we go to church, we believe in the Lord, people are looking at how we're going to react and respond to this public death. They're kind of like, what do you all do now? And so
Right.
I felt like people kind of knew who we were, but
Mhm.
once my dad passed, people were consumed by who we were. And so
Mhm.
I talk about those themes a lot while
Yeah.
still trying to figure out this abandonment and rejection that I feel because I'm like, God, I'm angry with you. Why would you take my
Right.
dad?
Right.
What did
Yeah.
I do to deserve this
Mm.
at such a young age? And so trying to navigate that and wondering if it's even okay to question God, right? So I'm like dealing with those moments in that book and I'm explaining to other people that when you feel a certain way, it's okay to park there and acknowledge it. It does not make you a wrong, in the wrong for that. It makes you human. And, sometimes like social media, we do things as highlight reels. We only talk about the things that make us feel really good, but no one really wants to share the not so good moments of how they're feeling and trying to work through that. And I think part of it is because we have people who are not as vocal or as open in
Mhm.
sharing the not so good moments.
Right. Oh my gosh, 100%. And it's really hard to show up in a public way and be vulnerable, and even like more so than even just like having a one-on-one conversation. And like you said, I remember being 16 and I'm still trying to figure it out, right? But I also really remember feeling like I probably was figuring it out wrong. That's how I would describe
Yeah.
it. Like I always felt like, this is going to sound silly, right? But I felt like I was one stupid comment or one bad outfit away from not having any friends to sit with at lunch, right? So
Hmm.
you're so guarded when you're that age because you're trying to not only figure out who you are, but you want to figure out you who you are and how you fit with everyone else, right? And so
Yes.
there you were, like faced with just the normal part of being a teenager, and now all of a sudden, and you're a private person, me too. Like it's so funny, Tasha and I are friends on Facebook, and like I'm very vulnerable on Facebook. Probably need to be more like what I was, in the recent years. But when I started my journey in entrepreneurship, I had 200 friends on Facebook. Like if you didn't know my mom, you didn't need to know my business. Like like
Yeah.
like I just didn't really want any attention. I wanted to be the wallflower, and that's really really hard when you're putting yourself out there. But to be brave enough to serve people through your pain
Mhm.
is what you're doing. And so I think that both of us have gotten over our fear of being on display
Yeah.
because it's of service that we're doing it. So it's not about us at all. It's actually out of 100% service and love for other people that we're
Hmm.
willing to do something that's really uncomfortable,
Yeah.
right?
Absolutely. That's exactly what it is. Because it's so funny, like, who they see day to day when I'm kind of like living life normal as
Yeah.
possible.
Yeah.
And when people see you because they see the things that you post on social media, they're kind of like, oh, you're a real person. And you're like, yeah. And I always have this running joke with my friends is that I kind of go through this metamorphosis. And
Yeah.
so it's like whenever I have a speaking opportunity, um, I change into someone who's like completely separate than,
Yeah. Me too. I do the
who they
same
see.
thing.
Yes.
It's so weird. It's so weird.
Because I think for us, we understand the underlying theme, which is
Yeah.
service. And
Yes.
so,
Yeah.
it's like, how can we genuinely impact the people that we're called to
Mhm.
serve if we're not stepping into that position? And so I
Yeah.
think that's what helps me, find comfort in saying, okay,
Mhm.
it's not about me. And,
Yeah.
it never was.
Yeah.
Right. And
Yep.
so, I think about the trajectory of my life now, like, all of those things had to happen in order for me to get here. All
Right.
of those things had to happen for me to really find the core of who Tasha is, because
Yeah.
for a while I was just associated with my dad's accident, or I was associated with the sexual assault that happened 2 years after, and so I had to kind of get back to the place of I can't allow these things to become my identity
Right.
because they're just a part of my journey and that's
Right.
it. So,
Right.
how can I reclaim my power and take ownership of who Tasha is? And so that's how that intentional inner work started. I'm like, I really have to figure out who I am outside of this not so good stuff.
Right.
I have
Right.
to really understand who I am outside of even the light and fluffy things. Because if I can't speak up to who I am, then how can others get, the opportunity to meet who I am?
Right. Oh my gosh, 100%. Yeah, and it's a journey. And I've talked about this a lot, like in our personal development space. It's almost like it's a journey back to ourselves. It's like a journey back to who God has designed us to be from the beginning, without all of the fallen worldly things and the
Yeah.
limiting beliefs and the programming that we get from the things around us, and the identities that we can take on from the things that happen to us, right? And it's really just bringing ourselves on the journey back to who he made us to begin with. And that's really, it's not necessarily, that's how I feel about it. It's not like getting to a place, it's coming back to a place.
Absolutely. It's that full circle moment.
Yeah.
Because the very things that I despised about myself are the very things that God finds useful. It's how I connect to people. I used to not like that I had the ability to connect with people because, when you're dealing with trauma, you don't want to be seen, you don't want to be visible, you want to hide.
Yeah.
It just feels comfortable that way. And then, it's kind of like I have this thing about me where, I never meet a stranger. They come up to me and they're pouring out their heart and soul, like, and you're just kind of like, I just wanted to grab a bag of chips and then leave the store. But, you know, but I realized that a lot of times people are looking for a safe haven. And if
Mhm.
I'm that person, then so be it. And so
Right.
instead of running away from it or
Yeah.
resenting it,
Mhm.
I learned how to embrace the gifts that I have.
Yeah.
And I realized that they're important and that they matter. And so
Right.
I just started cultivating that a lot more instead
Yeah.
of, trying to question, well, why me or why am I the person,
Mhm.
and I realized that there's so many things that are cold-hearted in the world that sometimes people really need that warm and cozy space.
Oh my gosh, 100%. And I love how you it's kind of this really cool thing about how you didn't take these two incidences, these two traumas, and define yourself with it, but you didn't ignore it or bury it. You're like, okay, well, how can I use this along with my
Mhm.
gift of connecting with people to serve? And
Yeah.
so instead, you chose to take something that was really awful and say, well, I guess this is what hand I've been dealt. So, how can I best serve people through this pain? And that's really where you're at. And I just got to say, like, gosh, to go from, losing your father at 16 to a sexual assault 2 years ago or 2 years later, I'm sorry, that had gotten to be so hard. Oh my goodness. I can't imagine that.
Yeah, it was one of those like after a while I started living in survival mode
Mm.
because it was like, okay, another 2 years roll by, right? When I'm now
Yeah.
20, is the shoe gonna fall again? Or, so I
Right.
kept living life in autopilot. And
Right.
so it wasn't until I got into my 30s that I realized this isn't what I'm called to do. This isn't who I am at all. And how can I make the change? And so instead of, shifting blame on others, I really had to look at myself and
Mhm.
say, why did I tolerate this stuff? Or why did I feel like it was acceptable when it came to the bare
Right.
minimum? Because at that point, I had been in toxic relationships. I thought it was commendable for, someone to accept me and all of the baggage that came along with it. But that's not a prize, that's not recognition.
Right.
And it's kind of like, why did I feel that I needed validation
Right.
from external sources, and so
Yeah.
I really had to take that responsibility and say, instead of running, instead of retreating, or instead
Mhm.
of minimizing my experiences, let me face them head on and
Yeah.
see what happens. The worst that could happen is, I either say, what, I'm a beautiful masterpiece and this is what healing looks like, or okay, I'm reliving this trauma in that way, right? And
Right.
so at that point in my life, I'm like, I already experienced two, tragic things, so it's like, what would be another? And so that's when I was just like, let me go ahead and really take that first step on really getting to know the core of who I've always been
Yeah.
created to be.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I love that. And you know that I just have this like really big passion for personal accountability and the power of choosing, right? Like I truly believe that God's free will and our
Mhm.
ability to choose is our superpower. And we get to
Yeah.
choose every single moment again, right? Which is so cool. And so we are not responsible for what happens to us, but we're responsible for what we do with ourselves in spite of it. And I think that that's so beautiful in what you did. And so I would love for us to be able to learn from you, Tasha, for the remainder of our conversation, how you were able to take yourself from that space and move it into this powerhouse of a woman that you are today. I want you to receive that because I believe that, like, woo, you are on fire, sister, with all the things that you're doing. So how were you able to get from that place to where you are now?
It's going to sound so cliche, but I had to be honest with myself. I think I was so used to hiding
Mm,
behind the trauma
yeah.
that I kind of fabricated a storyline. And when I say by that is I made excuses with self-sabotage, like
Right.
because this happened to me, it's okay for me to not take this promotion. It's okay to talk myself out of other opportunities, or it's okay to only, put up with this in this relationship. And so I created this storyline about what my future was going to look like because of my history. And so I had to be honest with myself. That was the first thing I did. I literally sat in a room, and I had a conversation with
Yeah.
myself and I said, Tasha, what is the seed that you're continuously watering that's festering in all of these other areas of your life? And that's when it hit me. It was the seed of abandonment and rejection. Um, I allowed how I felt when my dad passed to now go into everything else. And I allowed that to be the byproduct of why I accepted the bare minimum. And, for me, you're thinking like, well, how could the loss of a parent, make that much of an impact? Because you're just kind of like, that's your parent and it's a different type of trauma compared to a sexual assault. But you're losing something in both experiences.
Right.
You're
Right.
grieving. And I never made that parallel until I got honest with myself. It
Right.
was me not processing the actual loss and being frustrated that life is still happening, but he's missing.
Yeah.
Same with the sexual assault. It's like I did not process that someone made the choice for me to
Mhm.
take something from me, and I never addressed that. So I felt like my voice was diminished in both experiences because, on one hand, I'm just looking at, oh, that's the daughter of. And then on the second one, oh, that's the girl who was.
Mhm.
And so I felt like my voice didn't make a difference, and I had to be honest with myself. So that was the first step. The second step was telling people who were in my inner circle what was really going on, and letting them know. You may have noticed that I become withdrawn. You may have noticed that I'm not as candid as I've always been, and this is why. And creating that space for them to actually listen, creating that space for me to even trust them with what I wanted to share, and ultimately, creating the space for me to be vulnerable and not be judged. And
Right.
so, I always tell people find at least five key people in your life. I always call it the starting lineup. If you can't identify five people in your inner circle, then you may need to reassess and reevaluate, because you don't want people in your life that are only there when the exciting things are happening, but then they're not present when you need someone to either give you words of encouragement or pray for you or just sit and listen and not say anything at all. So that's very important. And then the third thing was that I had to unlearn some stuff. And so because I was so used to negatively speaking to myself or having these hidden thoughts that didn't align with who I am, I started finding positive affirmations. I started looking at scripture. I started looking at myself in the mirror because that was something I didn't do. And
Right.
I really started to love on me because that was something that I didn't do either. And so just really, getting into a space to say it's okay to unlearn some of the habits, some of the language, some of the patterns that I once did, and
Yeah.
really create something new out of it.
Oh my gosh, that is so powerful. And it's so, we often underestimate the fact that we have a whole lifetime of learned behavior, right? Maybe negative self talk, or maybe just, blaming things outside of ourselves, or maybe surrounding ourselves with people that, are safe in a sense that, you know, they're not going to ask too much of us or make us be too vulnerable. So we kind of surround ourselves with the not the right people that are going to really love us and help us to become the person that we can be. So there's all kinds of things that we carry for years and years and years, right?
Yeah.
And so oftentimes I think too that it's hard for us to just acknowledge that there might be this transition, that it's going to be a
Mhm.
process. It took all those years to create. It's going to take
Yeah.
a little bit of time and intentionality in order for us to be able to shift that, don't you think?
Mhm. Absolutely. Because at this point, right, it was 12 years after the sexual assault and 14 years after my dad passed. So that's in that time block of
Yeah.
things that I had to unlearn. And even, prior to that, subconsciously, things that may have been passed down generationally. So you're
Right.
talking at, getting in your 30s and you're like, okay, wait, maybe this isn't how life is supposed to be, or I know they meant well, but this isn't what is really supposed to happen. And so, getting out of that survival mode and really learning that it's okay to thrive, and learning that it's okay to be called to an abundant life and experience that. And even saying it's okay to have these desires where you don't have to choose A or B. You can have both, right? And so just really getting out of the restricted mindset and
Yes.
say, if this is who God has always called me to be,
Mhm.
why do I not have the capacity to desire more?
Right. Oh my gosh. That's something as I'm finding that in a lot of my clients that I help and in my own life, I found that as a Christian, I think sometimes we can sabotage ourselves by
Mhm.
thinking that we don't deserve or shouldn't even ask for or desire abundance. And
Yes.
what's so fascinating about that is that if you go back to scripture, like
Mhm.
God wants us to have an abundant life. Like what a lot of
Mhm.
people don't realize is that even when Moses talked about taking the Israelites to the land of milk and honey was the representation of abundance, you guys. Like
Mhm.
God wanted us to step into an abundant life. It's not a bad thing. It's a bad thing when we make that our idol and our God and we covenant and
Exactly.
we don't want anybody else to have what we have and we don't
Mhm.
really give of what we have. That's not
Mhm.
what he wants, right? But he doesn't want us to not have a beautiful life. And what oftentimes I think people fail to acknowledge is that God puts these desires in our hearts,
Yes.
right?
Yes,
And
absolutely.
so allowing ourselves to trust that and like, okay, God, like you put this desire in my heart. Like, I'll be honest, like Tasha, you and I have so much in common. Like, I am a crazy introvert.
Mhm.
I don't want the attention. I don't want, to put myself out there, but I do over and over and over again. And people are very surprised when I tell them that. But I feel like it's just I have to step into the life that he has for me one brave step at a time. And it's
Yeah.
crazy because like you guys, I'm going to ask you to think about this too. Like if I were to ask you what would the most amazing perfect day look like to you? And it's so interesting because that one question can give you this really cool snapshot of the desires that God is placing on your heart. So this is what I would envision. I would envision myself on a stage in front of thousands of people, which scares the crap out of me, by the way. But I'm literally on the stage and I'm speaking to a group of people who understand that if they are willing to trust God and they're willing to step in faith and to do the things that He's asking, He will bring us to a life beyond anything we could have ever imagined. And I'm on
Mhm.
this stage and I can see these light bulb moments in people's eyes going off. And my
Mhm.
family's sitting to the left of me and they're watching me and they're proud of me. And
Mhm.
after I'm done, I get off stage and we go down the street to the beautiful beach house and we spend time on the beach as a family, and that's my beautiful, most amazing day. You guys, I wouldn't choose that. Like, like that is so not even remotely who like I would define myself as. That's how I know it's from him.
Mhm.
Right. And so
Yes.
trusting that, like he wants me to have this abundant life. He wants me to show up in big ways so that I get to show him off.
Yes. That's the key. That is the key. A lot of times when people and I'm so glad you broke down what abundance really is, because people have this distorted view of what it
Mhm.
is.
Yeah.
They think the abundance is something that I want or I need or I must have. And it's quite the opposite. It's like walking into abundance or living abundantly is that you're showing him off. Like, it's big things that we couldn't do on our own strength, on our own power, like
Yeah.
at all.
Yeah.
It's one of those moments where when you are desiring abundance, you're now saying, I'm yielding to your plan, because these abundant spaces are so big that we cannot consciously try to fathom what it may look like or how it
Right.
may feel, because the whole point is it's going to be so much greater than what we could do as an individual. And, one thing I always say to people, especially those who try to take on everything on their own and don't believe in the power of community, it's like,
Yes.
okay, as one person, you can be an influence, but as a group, you can really cultivate change. And
Yes.
that's what we want to do. We want to cultivate change.
Yes. And I think, one thing that has come up in my prayer time that recently, which is I think really fascinating, I've never thought about it like this, but the word courage, right? Which is a lot of what we're talking about today, is really stepping courageously into where he's leading us, even though we
Hmm.
feel maybe ill-equipped or, damaged or, whatever. But what's really cool about it that I've recently kind of acknowledged is that the word courage is actually surrounded by the other letters in the word encouragement.
Yeah.
And so when we surround ourselves with the right circle and surround ourselves with the right encouragement, that is going to be what's going to give us the strength to have the courage to do the things, right? And
Hmm.
so I think that it's sometimes we feel like we have to, pull our hands up and get to work and whatever, and it's really hard, and so we don't make any of those first steps, but we can surround ourselves with these amazing people who
Hmm.
see us for what we can be and for what we are and love us anyway, right?
Yes.
And they encourage us to be able to take on the courage that we need to take those small steps in faith. And oh my gosh, like when you can find a tribe of people like that, like, isn't that so amazing?
It is awesome. Like, and again, going back to when I was living life through the lens of my trauma,
Mhm.
um, I would have never thought in a million years that I would have the group of people in my life that I have now. And I think, in order for that to happen, you have to be open
Yeah,
and you have to be willing. And so um it goes back to what you said, people seeing where you are and people seeing what you're becoming. It's very important. And it's just really a good space to be in, because I even think back of my prayers before all of these things happened. I was like, I really just want some good friends. I really want, people that I can confide in and they can confide in me. And you're thinking, you know this is in high school when you're still trying to, figure out who you are, and you're saying a prayer like that, and then you actually see it in fruition. You're like, wow, God, you really did hear me. Yeah, I had to go through some extra detours to get there, but now I see why they had to happen,
right,
and it's just when we ask for things or we pray and talk to God about different stuff, we may not know what the process will look like, but we
right.
know that the process is meaningful and purposeful.
Absolutely. And he's going to make all things turn out for the good of those who believe. So you can find the blessings and things. Maybe the road that you took there was harder than what you thought, but wow, look at
Yeah,
your legs. Look how strong they are from going through the weeds and down the
absolutely.
valleys and up the hills, right? Like wow, like look at how I'm equipped for this level of service that he's calling me to do. And there's just so much that I could literally talk to you all day. Like you just have this beautiful bright light about you that really makes me want to be the best version of myself, but in a safe, loving way. And I love that. So is there anything, Tasha, that we haven't had a chance to talk about that you really want to make sure that we share with our audience to encourage them or inspire them or give them hope or tools that we haven't already addressed?
I think one major thing that I want everyone to really learn is that it's okay to be you. Don't try to feel like you need to assimilate with everyone else or do the things that they do.
Right.
Um, you know, your voice is valuable, your life has purpose, the impact that you have is unique. And so embrace that. And, that's something I've always had to remind myself. And even now, right, when you have moments and everybody's like, well, why aren't you doing this or why aren't you doing that? Or there's so much more you could do. And, I always tell people I operate off of God's instructions first. And
Yes.
so there's no timeline, like, or, no limited process as to you getting where you desire to be. Just give yourself grace. And I think that's one thing we have to understand. Silence the noise, silence the critics,
Yeah.
and, really be your authentic self.
Oh my gosh, there's so much wisdom in that, you guys. And I think that, I don't know, Tasha, are you ever stuck in the all or nothing mindset, or the like the black and white mindset? I sometimes get caught in that. And so I
Yeah.
think that there's like a right or a wrong way to do things. And so
Mhm.
oftentimes what happens is I see people, and I've seen myself fall into this trap where I watch what other people are doing, and I think that's the right way to do it.
Mhm.
And you know what? At the end of the day, it feels like an itchy coat that doesn't fit, right? Like,
Yes.
it's like we're trying to put something else on that not designed for us. And I think that I want to just encourage all of you guys that if you're stuck in that all or nothing mindset, like I have been sometimes, to just like, I know it's scary. It's scary because you just want to like follow the leader and do what they're doing, but maybe that's not where God is telling you to go. So take that small moment of silence and just get in touch with your inner being, and your inner knowing, and where he's leading you. And I promise you that that coat is going to fit like silk, and you are going to like be where you're supposed to be. Don't you think?
Yes, absolutely. I love that analogy. I always say it's when we transition seasons for me. And what could fit, in the summer no longer fits in the winter. And
Right, right.
I always use that, like, you don't want to come into a new season ill prepared. And so it's the same token. Move at your pace. It's your race, don't compare it to anyone else's. And it's so easy to get caught up because one, we're an anomaly. Like, we're in this entrepreneurship, but yet we're Christians, and people are like, "How is that?"
Yeah.
So the way that we do things are different compared to, how social media or the world may tell us to do
Mhm,
things. And so it is easy to get caught up in the all or nothing, and then you have to kind of remind yourself, "Wait a minute,
mhm.
it's okay to not know all the details." you
Yes.
know.
Yes.
So I think it's very important.
Oh my gosh, there's so much wisdom in everything that you have to say. And you guys, I hope that you got as much out of this conversation as I did. And please let us know like what resonated with you. Share it out in your stories, leave a review. Let Tasha know all of the ways that you impacted her today, because it's so much fun as people who show up in these podcasts to hear from you. And we love it when you tag us in your stories so that we can share you out in our networks as well. It's so much fun to build a community around this because we don't get to see you guys. And so I just want to thank you so much for listening. And Tasha, one of the things that I always do is I ask my guests to propose a question to my audience that can really help them move from where they are to where they want to be. So, what kind of question would you have people ponder that is going to start to move them forward?
Well, my question is kind of like a two-part. Um, the first part is, what things are you willing to let go of? And then the second part is, how will you show up for yourself in this moment?
Love those both, you guys. So much wisdom in that. Thank you so much. And I hope you guys all, like I said, got so much out of this message. Thank you so much for listening. And we will all be here, same time, same place next week. Bye, everybody. Thank you so much for listening to the Untucked podcast. I'm so grateful to be on this journey with you. And don't forget to check out the show notes if you want to get into my private club, the Better Club, to be able to learn better ways to be better, do better, and have better. So until next time, keep showing up. Let's get unstuck together. Have a great day.